Yeah, I feel like it'd be way more chill, like coming into a family therapy. Coming into a family parties,
it is chill, yeah. But I guess the only problem is now it's up to the individual.
Yeah.
I think there's such a good vibe all at the same time.
Yeah, but
the sax section is super fun.
who's gonna replace Taylor?
I think it's going to be weird.
Oh, okay. Taylor, yeah, Taylor said that too, but he said it might be like some complications. It's like her voice did that. Yeah. Yeah, we'll probably be her. She's international. Yeah, I don't know. That's what Taylor told me.
That would just be a shame.
Yeah.
She's been living here for years now. She's a student here.
Probably just have to renew it.
Maybe.
If you renew it, she'll probably be fine.
But she did leave, so I don't see job too.
I don't know why. I don't know what gave Taylor that impression. Someone must have said something to Taylor.
No, I think it's a good concern.
It is a good concern.
It's
Yeah.
probably on the list. Maybe it does have to be renewed.
Yeah, that's probably it.
Or maybe times.
There's another dude, like a really good dude at Hamburg. All around, like big guy who like auditioned up there on Saturday.
That's what. Yeah. Everyone's vouching for him.
Oh really?
A couple people went up. I think everyone really wants him in the band.
Oh yeah, he'd be good.
Well, I think every single sax player like vouched for him.
Oh really? That's
Like
fun.
individually too. They let him like because I'm sitting right there and he was there. And they all went up one by one basically. It wasn't planned. It was just like, oh, is he? You know that Barry player? I really think he'd be a great. Like 2 minutes later, the next person. Oh yeah, Zigman. That Barry player.
That's awesome.
Adel's back too. Yeah, what? He's on probation. So like, if he messes up anything,
Dude, what happened? He just told Zigman he was sick and just disappeared.
yeah. Whatever.
He's not doing the summer.
I really get it.
It's bizarre. It's very bizarre. That's so strange, man.
We are going to wait 5 minutes, folks, and then begin. That's okay. Talk amongst yourselves.
So you're gonna do this summer?
Yeah, might as well.
What have you been doing during the year?
Writing a bunch.
Which one? Free, right?
Yeah. A lot of master's programs. Just in general for schools, graduate programs are funded.
Yeah, yeah.
So yours could be funded.
Oh, really?
Wow, right? Like, apparently the program costs tuition. Usually it's 11 grand.
Thank you.
What,
Sorry, I'll take those pages out of your way.
what did Doc do now?
I thought those were mine, sorry.
Yeah.
Sure, I think I'm good.
So would you take Campbell? I thought you do that as high school.
I would do it like,
Yeah.
oh my god.
And that's been see everything.
What's up, man? How you doing?
Sorry, I'm gonna just run to the washroom. Sorry.
I was like, I told some people about this. You maybe in that group chat with Josh, right? I forget how I heard it. I think they sent a link to it like a month ago. So I didn't think anyone was saying. Dude, that's probably what I was seeing when I was walking. I was like, how did you hear about this? Yeah. I see it on Facebook. I don't know, for $20.
I'm not even Italian to play drums.
I think it's more general.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it doesn't feel like that long
Living
ago.
well.
I went to school there. I lived there for 8 years.
Oh, yeah?
I'll do it.
Oh, refiled.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, right on, right on. I had a store there.
wedding university.
Clothing store with my wife.
Two actually.
Way
I was
back
thinking
when,
one.
yeah, right on Beck Street.
And,
Purple
yeah,
Haze.
so I
Oh, yeah? Oh, yeah?
yeah, no, it's fun though. It's good.
Yeah, I love clothes.
Yeah, well, we only do private events.
Trying to
Oh, okay.
keep on top of it.
Really, eh? Oh, okay.
We'll do some public things.
Yeah, no, it's good.
1 week in the active cab.
Yeah, we had a nice house here in
Tallest guy on
We'll
your
do
ass.
some public things. Like one of those.
yeah, old houses, yeah. It's like 1890.
I know it is.
You know, we do it well.
For
But
the drive.
When I saw him yesterday, I was like joking and giving him shit for it. And these are friendly.
it's good. I like it.
You are. Yay, good lives.
It's she's like, yeah,
What do you say?
really good. Yeah.
You're gonna hear all about it.
That too.
You're speaking audible.
Where I do weird things.
So,
But that's what we all have to do, right?
Exactly.
Nice to meet you.
Absolutely.
You have a gig last night?
Yeah, the past 2 nights
huge
actually.
dad scene. No, it's so.
Just got over a really bad cold. And
I've been there too.
thinking through that.
Did you play?
Played there,
So
yeah.
this
My
morning when I was
father
like, oh, it's
he ran a club there years ago, many, many years ago. Called the Hall of Fame. Believe it or not, long, yeah, 30 years ago. Yeah, I turned 18 and drove up there.
yeah, I mean, I don't normally
Long time.
stay sick for more than like 3 days.
Yeah, I don't know. You have to be some 50 reps or something like that.
Oh, I've got some.
No, it's congestion. So I feel like I'm far past the contagious.
I like to-
hand sanitizer and wash my
I was in
hands like
northern
crazy,
DC
but
too, along the Skeena River.
I still
Highway
sound
16.
Man, I want to
There's
Okay, I drove
communities
up.
on the way to Prince Rupert for the property stores.
Okay.
Hazelton, Smithers.
Picture.
All I
Prince
remember is
There's a picture of me beside
the river from
asked you to get a picture of me beside it.
Northwest Territory, Alberta. I think it was on the Mackenzie River. Is that what it is right there? Yeah, I remember that. And I remember going from nice paved road to bad road, basically. Like, it's terrible. It's paved now. 30 years ago it wasn't paved.
But it's still really kind of wet. Oh yeah, it's like the permafrost heaves.
I couldn't believe it.
From the band, I think a lot of new people would contemplate music, you know, but yeah, that's probably good. Maybe one
Yeah.
to go.
Some of the guitar player and singer, and I played in a family band called Blackburn. The Blackburns. Burn units, our family. All my brothers. Yeah, man. They kind of a funky groove. More in the blues world.
Yeah, well, I've been attending a blues jam.
Yeah, I said that. I remember reading that. I'm like, I'm not going to say it. I remember reading
Have you
it.
ever played St. Catherine's?
No. Believe it or not. Yeah.
Of course, yeah, they have what they do is like this sort of single guest thing
Okay.
with the house band. There's a couple places like that.
You know the band?
For today.
Grizz Brick is the guitarist.
Okay. What's the club name?
Oh, Monty's, and there's a bar upstairs.
Okay.
And their blues, they have Saturday afternoon blues.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I got called to a gig out there a few years ago. It's one of those kind of guest kind of things.
Yeah.
Like, I never
Remove everything to listen to everything.
but it was in. I know I haven't been there. I've been there maybe twice.
I have no idea.
An appreciative blues crowd.
Good,
Yeah, like
good.
people that come
Yeah,
from
but
other
blues festival.
places, say, yeah, the Canal Street Blues Festival.
Oh, no, I've done that.
Yeah, okay,
like
so
that,
that's
yeah.
right beside St.
Yeah,
Catherine's.
yeah, no, I played that.
I grew up there and haven't lived there in a million years, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
pretty weird coming back.
That Canal Bank Shuffle. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was different. Yeah, it's great video. I don't see the girl with the same costumes and I should. I think they're in the second channel.
Who's around here?
Matter of fact, we went down to Memphis and they sponsored our name. This IBC's International Blues Council. Yeah, this is people from that. From our bench. Really great people.
Check. Can you hear me? Yeah. No, I can't hear you. Stephen, is that loud enough? Are we okay? Okay. Thanks for coming. Thanks for braving the weather. I know there was supposed to be a weather apocalypse upon us at this point, and of course it's not what they said, but we did have some people coming in from out of town who apologized. I told them they were wimps. One guy got stuck. He said that he was in Halliburton. He got stuck in his driveway, like he couldn't move, and he was so apologetic. I'm sorry, I can't, I'm trying, I'm still trying. I said, you know what, just watch us online. We are streaming today's music business seminar online at jazz.fm. If you feel compelled, in other words, please do it. Contact friends and say, this is a great seminar, why don't you join us? Jazz.fm, right on the homepage is a link to the whole seminar. All day will be streamed live for free. That's not to say they're going to be missing out on a lot of the stuff you guys are getting today, lunch, but also the ability, the opportunity to network with each other, to talk to the different speakers we have here, and to get a more, ask questions and get a much fuller experience. So welcome. Welcome to Jazz FM91. If you haven't been here before, this is the legendary Longham McQuaid Music Hall. It looks like a small room, but it is incredible what goes on in here. We do concerts all year, including Holly Cole in a couple days. Like, it's a serious concert venue right here, what goes on in here. Oscar Peterson's a big part of our station. There's his head up there, a lovely piece of art. Apparently he caught that fish. And you get 10 points if you can tell me what kind of fish it is.
Marlin.
Sailfish. Did someone say sailfish? Sailfish. Brilliant, Alan. Thank you. He caught that fish in Acapulco. And if you, I'm sorry to do this, don't hurt your necks, but behind, right there is Oscar Peterson's door. Kelly, his wife, is on our board of directors, and their house in Mississauga had that door with a picture of...
Fats Waller.
Thanks. Well done. Fats Waller, I guess, was important to Oscar Peterson. So we have, this place is kind of a museum of jazz in a way. You're welcome to look around as we go into breaks. I do have notes. I'm not just going to blabber. Yes, we should do some housekeeping. I'm just going to tell you that this is the sixth music business seminar, jazz-oriented music business seminar that Jazz FM91 has done. We did the first in 2015. And we're very proud of these seminars because they fit in with our mandate. And I'll talk about that a little bit. My name is David Wall. I'm the Director of Community Outreach and Education. I've been here for about 3 years. And a major part of my training was just learning how to say Director of Community Outreach and Education, because it's a mouthful. Basically what I do, I like to characterize my job as running the touchy-feely stuff at Jazz FM 91. Maybe you all know, because you're here, that we are a registered charity. We are a not-for-profit organization, which makes us unique in the Canadian radio world at our level. The other thing, of course, that's really unique is that we're the only 100% jazz radio station in Canada, and one of the few in the world. This is the only music we play, basically. And that puts us in a very unique position. And because we're a community radio station, not-for-profit, and because we are a jazz radio station, we are, as I like to say, compelled and overjoyed to give back to our community. We are obligated, based on our license and the fact that we get donations, to give back to our community, to run programs such as this that help the community. And when I first got the job, I didn't know what it was, and I figured out that a big part of my job was defining what that community is. What is the Jazz FM 91 community? And I figured out there are 3 main parts to that community. There's our listeners, obvious, donors and listeners, people who support us. There's the actual physical community, the people who live in our broadcast area. And we run a lot of programs for children and adults, specifically in underserved neighborhoods in the GTA and beyond. But then, most importantly, in terms of today's seminar, the third section is musicians, specifically jazz and blues musicians. And part of that, of course, is selfish, because if jazz musicians aren't thriving, then there's no jazz. So then what are we doing? We can't play Louis Armstrong all day, even though that might be kind of nice. Jazz needs to be a current and future prospect. And so Jazz FM91 supports musicians as much as we can. Jazz musicians and blues musicians mostly. And we do that in many ways. For example, we run concerts. Jazz FM is also unique because we are concert promoters. We put on 30-odd shows a year, including some grand ones, like our show at Kerner Hall in April. And we're hiring jazz musicians left, right, and center. And in some ways, you probably know, that's the best thing a jazz musician can get, a gig. And we pay well, and we hire jazz musicians and blues musicians as much as we can. So that's one way. Another way we have, I'll just run through some of these, and this does relate to today's seminar. This is not an ad for Jazz FM91, as much as it seems. We run something called the Musicians Benevolent Fund. If you go to Jazz FM, you go to the support tab. The Musicians Benevolent Fund is there to help jazz and blues musicians who are in an emergency situation financially. So we've helped people with health issues. We've helped families pay for funeral expenses, all sorts of things. This is a constant reality and service that we give the Musicians Benevolent Fund. And I'm giving you a shortened, condensed version of the stuff we do. We also do these seminars. And this is the sixth, as I said. We did the first in 2015. The point of this seminar really is that it fills a void. There really isn't anything else like this that I can think of. We certainly don't have jazz conferences like they have in the United States and Europe. We don't have that in Canada. This is pretty unique what's going on here. And this is not the only one. We're also doing one on April 29th at Hughes Room. There'll be part 2. We do 2 a year. And we're very proud of this little seminar program we have. I think that you're going to get a lot out of today. The speakers are experienced. The speakers are all articulate and you'll find, I believe, have a lot of insights into what it is to be a jazz musician today, blues musician today, how the business can work for you, against you, etc., etc. I'd like to make some thank yous. First and foremost, TD Bank Group. Well, look at that. Is it visible? No. Supposed to say TD up there. I'll deal with it. I'll do it. TD Bank Group. You probably know that TD Bank Group is this really incredible institution that is supporting jazz music in Canada, like no one else. There are TD jazz festivals all over the place, all over Canada. They're supporting us today. They're supporting individual musicians. So really, it's magnificent what they do. And I'm just going to be honest. I was raised by a communist, and so the thought that I would be thanking the bank is beyond, like, it's just the most amazing thing. But really, they are. So please put your hands together for TD Bank Group. I'd like to thank Jazz FM91 CE and President Ross Porter, who thought of this jazz-oriented music business seminar shtick back in 2015. He's really an ideas man. He's a wonderful guy and full of integrity and really, really does care deeply about the artists that we play. And this is yet another manifestation of that in Ross Porter. So thank you, Ross Porter, CEO and President of Jazz FM91. We have 2 wonderful volunteers. They volunteered their time. That's a big part of Jazz FM. And you know what? I recommend it to anyone who has the time to volunteer here, because you get to see incredible shows. You get to experience things like this. And again, you feel like you're supporting jazz music. The two people here today are Nadine Feldman and Bill Prentice. I think you met them at the front. And give them a round of applause. They're going to be here all day. We have two emerging jazz artists here who are going to be running kind of like on-the-spot social media postings, tweeting, going to their various platforms, talking to their peeps about the seminar all day, and then they're going to write blogs afterwards that will be on the website. And there's actually, if you go to jazz.fm/Music Business Seminar, it's in the Education tab, you'll see profiles of these two people. They're great musicians in their own right. Give it up for Georgia Higgins and James Morris. Just a couple more things. You've been handed, I hope you all have, a couple pieces of paper. One of them is a list of what's going on today, and at the bottom you'll see the Twitter list there. And I would love it if you like, feel free to post about stuff today, because it's important that we have outreach. It's very important for a not-for-profit organization such as ours, okay? And the hashtags and stuff are written down at the bottom of the page. I really appreciate that. And equally important, if not more important, you've been given a survey. Easy to fill out. It'll take you a minute. Just, give us your impressions, give us suggestions of how to improve, because there's more of these seminars coming. As I said, there's one at Hughes Room on April 29th, and we need feedback. And I also am obligated to give feedback to TD and to our funders. So please fill those out. And there is, get this, an incentive. We are giving out a prize. We will have all the surveys, and we'll pull out a survey and the person we post, so make sure to put your contact at the top of the page on the right there. The prize is a bundle of CDs chosen, jazz CDs chosen by our music director, Brad Barker. So it's a prize package, an incentive. Please fill those out. One more little thing to mention is that part of our increased outreach around these seminars is that we are adding a web page to the Jazz FM webpage. And our website is impressive. Thousands of people go to it every month. It's a really successful website in a lot of ways. So this is not insignificant. We are starting a new music business seminar page that will be an ongoing concern. We'll be posting articles about the music business. We will be inviting you, people who have come to these seminars, to perhaps post your impressions, post your story after you've come to the seminar. Did it affect you? Or just talk about your experience in the music business, what it's like to be a jazz musician, what it's like to be connected to the music business. We're going to have this ongoing page, this ongoing, again, social media concern as a resource for our friends who are musicians and music workers in the world of jazz and blues. Do you want to sit down?
Eventually.
Okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
Right, so, as I said, there's a lot, I had to figure out what the community was that I was dealing with. And I came up with the three-part community concept, and the third part is jazz musicians. I feel like it is our responsibility as a jazz-oriented organization to get rid of some cliches. One of the big cliches right now, and you hear it all the time, and it has, like all cliches, it has an element of truth. The cliche is that things are hopeless. Might as well not become a musician. It's so crazy. How do you make a living? How do you have a career? It's worse than ever. Things like that. So, again, that's partly true. But I think what we're going to find today, is that there are other ways of looking at the world. There are other possibilities. For example, our first speaker is going to talk about social media, the good and bad of social media for people in music, Miranda. There are cliches and impressions about how social media works, how you're just like one of zillions, how can you possibly get yourself heard, all that sort of stuff. She's going to talk about the pros and cons ways to tap in and stuff like that. So that's one thing we're going to talk about, very important. This is a do-it-yourself era. We hear that all the time. And the queen of do-it-yourself is Molly Johnson. She will be here. I'll be interviewing her. So in some ways, I don't know what's going to happen because I can't even preview because Molly Johnson's, it's part of the fun with her is she does go off. And we'll have, I'm sure, a fascinating conversation. But I'm sure we're going to touch on one of her most important concepts, which is you have to do it yourself, every aspect of your career. And one of her main things is, and she's been saying this a lot recently, is write your own songs, write your own tunes, and then you control it, things like that. So that will be a part of Molly's talk. Then we're going to have Matt Stevens, who we've flown in. He's this wildly successful in jazz terms, guitarist, plays with Esperanza Spalding, that kind of thing. He's going to be here, and he is very hopeful and positive. Now, partly because he's been so successful, but he does have a real charm to him. We did a little pre-interview, and I was amazed by the positivity coming out of him and some strategies he might have, some ideas he might have for a more positive outlook on life as a jazz musician. And then finally, something very new. I'm very excited about having Dr. John Chong here. He's an expert on health, both physical and mental health for musicians and artists. And I think this is something that we don't, a lot of these music seminars we don't talk about this stuff. In some ways, it's the most important thing. We have to be healthy as people. We have to self-love and all that stuff. Because, let's face it, and this is, I don't know how to put this, but I was an artist for many years. That's how I made my living. And I think people in the arts, because we're expressive people or whatever it is, we might be prone to depression. We might be prone to a kind of sensitivity that maybe other people don't have sometimes. So that's something that needs to be looked at. And that's the physicality. Tinnitus, problems with repetitive action, all that stuff. Anyway, John Chong is fascinating. He's going to be here later, and he has a whole PowerPoint, and he might even have some machines he's brought to talk about something or other. I can't remember what it's called, a technical term. So that'll be great. And I'm just going to tell a very quick joke to start things off. Super fast. It's not even very funny, but you'll get the... In fact, the first line is terrible. An elderly man is hit by a car. The end. No. An elderly man is hit by a car, and he's lying in the street, and a younger man runs up to him and says, "Old man, are you comfortable?" And he says, "I make a living." And just to conclude, the point of that joke is, what's a living? Right? When we say we make a living, what does that include? Yes, there's money, but what is a musician's life? And I think that's one thing we're going to try to define today. So concludes my introductory remarks. I'm going to bring up my new friend, Miranda. Miranda Mulholland is the kind of person who makes me feel like a lazy bum, because she does everything, and she does everything well. She's a Renaissance woman. Festival organizer, record label operator. She's a well-known, very accomplished, I would say, virtuosic violin player. Plays with people, although she was just in Europe. Plays with famous names like Donovan Woods, Justin Rutledge, Sarah Slean, Cowboy Junkies. It goes on and on. She's been on like 50 records. She's also become a bit of a maven, expert type on music biz stuff, so she's quite in demand at different conferences, etc., etc. She's going to be here talking about social media stuff. Please welcome to the stage, Miranda Mulholland. I can bring that. I have this.
I have a funny story to tell you. As a professional musician for 15 years, I don't know much about vacations, but I took a vacation in December. I went to this tiny little town south of Geneva, and I'm sitting by a little canal, and I've ordered myself a crepe, and I'm feeling very French, and the radio comes on, and they're playing Jazz FM from Toronto. A little bit of home.
can I just say that this is, because it's a seminar, not a lecture, is it okay if I say that people are free to ask questions? Or?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I'll sort of go on at length, and then perhaps there's a question here. From my diminutive stature. Okay, so you heard a little bit about me and what I've been doing. As David said, my name is Miranda Mulholland, and I went to Western and then McGill, studied opera performance, and I got into the music industry in about 2002, which is kind of exactly when we saw this big fallout of revenue. I won't go on and on about all the things I've done, but just that I had been accumulating credits and connections and everything, and yet still not feeling financially secure. And I started asking a lot of questions about that and talking to friends about this. And it's now been named, and the European Union has officially recognized it. We're bringing this to Canada. Part of the things that I'm doing right now are reaching out to other musicians in an advocacy type of way. So we're telling the government what our lives are like. And this is the thing that's known as the value gap, which is a significant disparity between the value of creative content that's accessed and enjoyed by consumers and the revenues that are returned to the people and businesses who create it, so all of us. Just even having this value gap recognized is a step forward, so that's exciting. What that really means for us as creators, and how many of you are creators and musicians and composers? It's dwindling, obviously, in the last 20 years, dwindling revenue sources. There's more competition for fewer dollars. There's a marketplace exhaustion. I don't know if you've felt this. I know that in the theater they talk about the Netflix effect and that why people aren't coming out to things. And I sort of look at the Netflix effect less of a problem and more of just a symptom. We are sort of, there's more content available right now than there ever has in history of the world. So I think that's leading to some exhaustion of audiences. Also, audiences have been expecting free music and not to pay for music. So these all sound like challenges of small businesses. And we are, each of us is a small business as a musician. And you know, when we were promised this new democracy with the internet, when the internet was sort of invented and begun the little seeds of it in like 1968, there was this sort of democratizing dream of it. And it was supposed to be this counterculture and sort of a decentralization of control of communication, but that was the bill of goods that creators were sold, and that there was going to be no middleman, that we could go direct to our fans. And we were promised that in this digital age, we would level the playing field and we'd eliminate the middleman. But, and I'm sure most of you feel this way, like, as an indie musician, I have to upload my tour dates on my website, on Facebook, Bands in Town, Twitter, Instagram, and Factor. I report and update my neighboring rights with ACTRA, and I manage my creative catalog with Resound. I report my shows and set lists on SOCAN, and I pay to report my sales and at venue. I use SoundCloud for private streams for media, YouTube to upload my content before someone else does, and I pay a percentage of my income to my distributor to get my music online and in stores. So does that sound like less middlemen? I don't think so. It's also just an overwhelming amount of office work, and it keeps us from actually creating and performing. You know, and this affects everyone. I think there's still this perception of success that can be a little dangerous. And I want to tell you a funny story. I started a music festival last summer, and I texted a multi-Juno award winner to see if he was available to perform at my festival, and I said, and he's a pal, and I just said, hey, are you free this weekend? And he texted back and he said, oh no, I've been booked up for ages. And 5 minutes later, he texted me back and he said, oh, you mean as a musician? I thought you wanted to rent my Airbnb. So we're sort of turning to all these other ways that we can make an income. And this is even a multi-Juno award winner, someone that we would look at and perceive as doing better than us. And I think a lot of this happens and has happened because of the business models of our tech companies who are using our music. When Peter Thiel came on the scene, he said, I no longer believe that capitalism and democracy are compatible. And he founded PayPal. And what he calls the PayPal mafia now includes Jeff Bezos. And Jeff Bezos, he famously owns Amazon. He said, Jeff Bezos, and I quote, "Your margin is my opportunity." And margins for creators is pretty slim to begin with. And I want to point out here that Google's margin is 70% profit. That has never happened in the history of the world, that a company made 70% profit. And that is off of things like YouTube that have safe harbors. So the business models of these streaming services also, they work on market share. So if you're Drake and you put out a record the same month that I've put out my record, well, you're obviously going to get more spins than I am. And because of the algorithms, more spins, make more spins, etc. But per stream, he makes more than I do with my little niche record because it's based on market share. So the niche sort of gets further and further and further away. And this is really dangerous. I run a record company called Roaring Girl Records. It's a boutique company. We have 10 artists on our label. My mandate was I just wanted people who were skilled at their craft, had sort of done their 10,000 hours. I wanted artists who were interested in doing cross-genre, mix-up, nothing sort of, I didn't want to just be a roots music label. I wanted to be something that had really just an appreciation of fine musicianship. So I have Patricia O'Callaghan, who's a cabaret singer, and some of my bands, which are more roots-based. But I also have this young man named Edwin. And Edwin Huzenga and I grew up together. He was way better than me, always, on the violin in Suzuki School. And I used to hate him for it, because he's younger than me. And anyway, we've grown up to be good friends, and he has played with Tafel Music, he's played with Opera Atelier, he's also played with Mars Volta and the Wooden Sky, so he's really done a lot of different versatile things. He came to me with a beautiful record, and it's sort of a Baroque Celtic crossover record, but fabulous musicianship, just really, really wonderful. And we decided to put it out on the label and had everything prepared. There's a lot of back end that's required. I'm sure if you do it yourself, you know, even if with CD Baby, how much work you sort of have to prepare these things. So our date of release was upon us, and we got all of the links from all of the different streaming services. And the only one that didn't come up with a little link that we could get to was Apple Music. And it took a lot of digging. It took months of digging. Meanwhile, you know, when you've got your record, you've got one moment to kind of get public's attention and say, okay, it's out now, go do something, buy it, stream it, tell people. And his favorite method, Apple Music, was not available. What we found out 2 months later was that InGrooves, which is the back end of my distribution company, so here I am, Roaring Girl Records, distributed by Fontana North, and then InGrooves is the company that does all of the sort of uploading of the metadata. They decided, quietly, they made no announcement about this, they decided that they were no longer going to upload classical music, a whole genre, because it was too difficult and it was too many things to do as metadata and it wasn't making the money back. So as a result, we had to fight to get it up on Apple Music. But I think that's philosophically extremely troubling. I wrote this article a little while ago, and I hope I'm going to sort of read it, because I did edit it. But I hope you don't mind. But I think this is a really important question philosophically. I mean, who was bothered by like if classical music just wasn't available to be put up? Philosophically, who has a problem with that? Okay. So this is what I've been thinking a lot about. Now, I love looking at drafts of artwork. I love early versions of novels and songs and poems. And I love sketches of paintings. And I was recently at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and I saw a sketch for John Constable's The Hay Wain. And it was an oil sketch. So he'd been in the field and he'd been making this oil sketch in that moment. And you can see the skill, obviously his skill, but when you compare it with the final version, which is in the National Gallery, and when you're touring, if you tour in London, it's free. You can go in the National Gallery and go find a favorite painting to visit every time you go. I love that they have free art galleries. You can see the thought and the decision and the composition that he arrived at for the end result. But I almost prefer the sketch. There's this fluidity in the sketch. There's an art economist whose name is David Gallinson, and he talks about the process of creation. So he differentiates between the flash of lightning versus the arduous creative process. Now we hear a lot about the flash of lightning. I think the myth is that we all just get inspired and then go scribble down and there you go. He calls that conceptual innovators. The songwriters who wrote a song in minutes and it went to #1, the painters who sat at a canvas and with deft strokes completed a masterpiece. This idea goes back to ancient Greece and the idea of a muse visiting with ideas of brilliance. But the notion that this is all how it actually always transpires, I think, pays short shrift to the work that we do, the grueling work that he calls experimental innovators. So Leonard Cohen took 6 years to write Hallelujah, and Bruce Springsteen took 6 months to work on the lyrics to Born to Run. Margaret Mitchell took 10 years to write Gone with the Wind, and I don't know if anyone knows Alistair MacLeod, but fantastic Canadian writer. He wrote No Great Mischief in 13 years. So I think in an increasingly hurried world, one of the messages that we need to get to our government, and they're listening right now, they are listening because they have to. They've got this new Creative Canada that they've got to sell to Canadian people. We can be people who can tell them what to do. We need to tell them that they have to be long-term thinkers. Governments, funders, publishers, and labels need to remember that most artists need time to develop and grow and realize their visions. The Tipping Point author, does anyone know Malcolm Gladwell? Secret Canadian, lives in New York. He said when asked about the pressure that the publishing industry puts on writers to write, he said, "Quality work takes time. As a writer, my principal observation about why others writers fail is that they're in too much of a hurry. I don't think the problem with writing right now is a failure of output. I think it's a failure of quality." So I think our social climate's been moving towards this notion that now is better, and I think further away from time and skill. You know, the notion that anyone can record an album in their bedroom and upload it for free, in theory, is a democratizing one. But it begs the question, just because you can, should you? Now, how many people studied the music in school? That's a great number. So I wonder how you feel about this amateurizing movement, which is sort of the same concept, this idea of anybody can do it. This is something that I have struggled with for years. When I was in grade 7, I was a Suzuki student, I was in a string quartet. And we played weddings and things. And the cellist had put the group together. And she sort of managed the bookings. And she was one of the worst cellists I've ever played with. And the last wedding I ever did with them, we were playing Pachelbel Canon, which the cello part has 8 notes, I think, and 2 are repeated. And she couldn't get through the thing. And I said, afterwards, you know, I said, I really feel poorly taking this bride's money. We didn't do a very good job. I was being very diplomatic. We didn't do a very good job. But I thought, you know, we should really maybe practice more before we put ourselves out there. And she said, "Oh, but they loved it. They didn't notice. They thought we were great." Now, this is where I have a problem with it, because we are the ones who are the arbiters. We have been entrusted. We have a responsibility to up the taste-making bar. And I think, you know, in this day and age, that's really suffering. Trusted tastemakers have been eradicated by shrinking budgets and replaced by algorithms. Now, there's been a vast and exponential growth in output and content in the last 20 years. And while reviewers and consumers are drowning in choice, paid arbiters of taste are being laid off and replaced by amateurs and algorithms. I think that limits and controls as well, because each calculation is made on a decision that you made before you and others with similar tastes, but that's limiting to the imagination. And those surprise discoveries of against-type choices that radically change thoughts, they disappear. And isn't that one of the best parts about art, is changing thought? So, okay, philosophy of niche, as that was. Back to the digital disruptors. Disruptors are important. So we can't turn back the clock. We have the internet, we need it. The whole social media question, how involved do you want to be? It does take up a lot of time. But we need to move forward. But we have to also ask our government to anticipate change rather than simply being reactive. Because a lag time while they decide new copyright reform, that could be your album cycle, 2 years, or it could be an entire career. So we need them to act faster. And there are lots of ways to do this. I'm going to get to a couple things that everyone can do, but does anyone know who their MP is in their region? There's also a website you can go to and you put in your postal code and you can find out your MP. And they do listen and they are expecting letters. And right now, the last thing I heard from Julie DeBruzen, who's the MP for the Danforth region, she's just been made chair of the Heritage Committee, so this is very good. But she told me the other day that she's hearing from actors and she's hearing from screenwriters and she's not hearing from musicians about what we want from the Copyright Board and any kind of review. So this is an opportunity for you to speak up. You know, any new invention has consequences. When the compass was first, it allowed explorers to encounter new worlds. It allowed merchants to get their ships safely and quickly across big bodies of water, but it also allowed pirates to flourish. And it with these modern safe harbor laws. So because YouTube has uploader content and they call themselves just dumb pipes, then they're exempt by the safe harbor law to pay you guys properly for your work. In Canada, we have another thing called the radio royalty exemption, which was made in 1997. And this was established to protect ma and pa radio stations, to protect stations like this, niche stations that were doing something, had a voice. And what this means was they only have to pay $100 in royalties on their first $1.25 million in revenue. This is in the Copyright Act right now, and it can be changed. At the time, protecting ma and pa stations is really important. We live in a giant country, people feel disconnected, but right now most of the stations are owned by Rogers and Bell and all these giant companies. So you, as artists, are subsidizing them, and that doesn't seem fair. So again, we're not asking for the time to be put back, but we're just asking for policy to catch up with this. Has anyone played on a TV or film soundtrack? I played on the Republic of Doyle TV show, which went on for five or 6 years and is now syndicated around the world. And I played on a film called Maudie recently, among other things. But because of a tiny wording in our Copyright Act, who knew copyright could be so fun? Just a tiny, tiny wording of what sound recording means in the Copyright Act of Canada means that I am not paid every time that show plays all around the world. This is just because of the wording in the Copyright Act. And if that changed, as it does in many, many countries, I think 44 countries around the world, including France and Great Britain, I would be paid and you would be paid for any time that you have performed for a soundtrack for TV and film. So really asking for some modernization in policy. How excited. Who's going to write to their MP? Yeah. If you want, actually, also on my website, I have an advocacy page, and I'm going to be putting up a letter just sort of outlining some of these things, because this is a really important time right now in Canadian history, because we do have, they're looking at the Copyright Act at this moment. So why am I speaking out now, after 15 years of sort of thinking that this was as good as it's going to get? I'm going to drive my 1998 Corolla, and that's okay. But, you know, I felt all that things about the value gap, but I attribute it to so many other things. I thought I just wasn't good enough, and I thought I wasn't working hard enough. And then I got skeptical, and I started talking to my friends and my colleagues and my friend who runs an Airbnb. And, you know, this is across the board. So you are good enough. You are working hard. No one's gonna work harder than you for your project. I think David pointed that out. This is one thing that I tell a lot of my younger artists on my label. No one can help you until you care the most about yourself. That you do the most work, and I think that's the most important lesson for young musicians. I see some people who get managers and then they think, oh, well, that'll be taken care of, and they kind of lose the sight of the ball, but that's the most important thing. But anyway, once I got skeptical and started talking and started listening to my friends, I realized that it wasn't just those things. I was working hard enough. It's just that there's some levers that need to be pulled and changed, and they can be. And that's the exciting part. I was honored and privileged to speak at the Economic Club of Canada, detailing some of these difficulties of artists, and the response from other artists was so amazing. So every people said, you know, I feel this way too. I completely understand. This is the way I've been living. I thought I wasn't working hard enough. And what I learned was just being honest, and that was a great start. Because it's so tempting in this Facebook era and Instagram era of trying to make your life look very, very glossy. And you know, it does look good to have all these filters on, but we have to be careful about what we use these filters for our lives, because I think audiences don't understand. You know, I have so many people who come up to me after shows and they say, oh, I found you on Spotify. And I want to say, well, you just put 0.002 cents in my pocket. Thanks. You could also buy my CD, which is right here. But I think people don't really know, and that's the first step towards educating our audiences. I made a little pamphlet, and it's available on my website in very handy infographic form, in English and in French. And it just talks a little bit about what different stakeholders can do. And we have to remember, you know, I was in an industry meeting. I won't say what meeting, but one of the people around the table said, well, where would artists be without industry? And I was so offended, because where would the industry be without the artists? We are the prime reason they are here, all of them. And so we need to start speaking up. So I've got a thing for industry members, you know, about compensating your artists, taking bold steps, paying for tickets. I mean, how many times do you have somebody who's in the industry ask to be on the guest list for free? And well, you paid them a commission. Why are they not paying you for your work? I mean, it's a small thing, but also about what consumers can do. So buying your release on the day of release, because that actually helps your algorithms, certain things like that. There are free things to do, ratings. Even just going on and rating your album for free, if you tell your fans to do that, that actually does help. Reviewing them helps. That's free. They can do that for free. What the government can do is they can end some of these cross subsidies, like the radio exemption, and also take a firm line with Google. I saw an article yesterday that Trudeau had met with Facebook, and there was actually a really promising thing. We've heard a lot of tech love previously, and so there was actually he said, you know, if you don't fix some of these news trending things, we're going to take a harder line with you, which at least I thought was promising, because Facebook had done that funny thing where they said, oh, we're not going to have fake news. It's not going to be curated by bots. It's only people who are putting this up. And then they realized that made them a publisher, and so they wouldn't be exempt from safe harbor laws, so they retracted that, and now it's again a trending thing. So you see how these tech companies are using our governments to get what they want. Anyway, this is available on my website if you want to take a look. Just as a little note of caution, I am optimistic about the future, and I think the more we speak up about things and the lives of our actual lives of what being a creator looks like in Canada. But I was just at this conference in Georgia, and I saw this amazing keynote by a guy named Jonathan Taplin, who wrote a book called Move Fast and Break Things. And I just wanted to share a couple of those things because it feels very prescient. Frankenstein, the book, came out 200 years ago this year. And Mary Shelley had witnessed her industrial revolution, and she saw the dangers of moving too fast and not considering consequences. And these are the things I'm talking about with these safe harbors. Does anyone know what a Skinner box is? It's an old TV term. So it was a little mouse, and if he wanted to get fed, he would press a button and the little pellet would come out. And at first it was like every time he pressed it, he got a pellet. So he only ever pressed it when he was hungry. So what they did was they randomized it. And so the little mouse would press it, not get anything. He'd press it again, not get anything. Press it again, get something. And this reward-based randomness is what Facebook and all of these things have got us hooked on, and why we check our phones 125 times a day. That to me is a little worrying. Alexa, Does anyone have an Alexa in their house? So there was a case that just came up about Alexa, and it was about, because what this really is surveillance consumerism, but there was an Alexa in a house and there was a domestic dispute. And they went to, once the inspector saw that there was an Alexa in the house, he went to Amazon and said, can we hear what had happened? And at first there was a bit of pushback and they said, no, we don't record anything. But sure enough, they did, and they could hear the whole dispute that happened. So that thing is not just there when you talk to it, it's listening, it's tracking keywords that you say in order to sell you things. And again, same with the Facebook thing, we're sort of spending our time building these profiles for Zuckerberg. We're working for Mark Zuckerberg for a few hours a day to build a profile that he can then sell to other people. So this is why I'm skeptical and nervous about social media. I think it can be a great tool for us, but I don't think we can't follow it down this track, because I think it leads into time wastage and sort of fake results. And we need to think more about the creation of something that actually matters in this day and age, and things that really will resonate and connect for the future. Here's one more story that scared the living Jesus out of me, because I also watch Black Mirror. But do you know what the Sesame Social Credit Score is? So this is right out of a Black Mirror episode. But in China, 220 million people are using this voluntarily. And what it is, so it's like Facebook, a profile, and has your credit score on it. But because they can track where you go and what you do, so if you were just jaywalking across the street and they caught you on because they have facial recognition cameras, your credit score goes down. If you say something that the government doesn't like, your credit score goes down. And people are using this because they want to get jobs. They're putting it on their job applications. They're putting it on their dating networks. And they're voluntarily doing this. But Facebook could do this in 10 minutes. And did anybody do the Google where you get to find the painting that you look like?
Yeah.
So Google did that, and what they did was you couldn't just upload a selfie. You had to take it to exact specifications, right? In order to get the result. So now they have this exact look of your face that they've tracked. Now, some people would say, well, they already have it anyway. Everything's out there. But I think we need to be really conscious of privacy, and that's an important thing. And anyway, I hope that doesn't scare. Now everyone looks totally scared. But I think I'll leave you with this last thing. And the thing that keeps me going and has kept me going through all of this, when people said there's no money in music, or what are you doing? Or my parents said, why weren't you a lawyer? The magic the alchemy that we perform when we get up in front of a crowd and we're playing our music and they're here and we're here, and that's never going to happen again, and nothing can record that in the way that happens in that room. I think the more and more people get on their devices and get in that space, the more and more valuable what we're doing is, because you can only do it once. The ephemery of that, I think, will never go away. So what we're ambassadors of an actual moment that we're creating, and I don't think there's anything more valuable than that. So continue on, creators. Does anyone have any questions?
We have time for questions. That's part of the point of today, is interacting with our speakers. So,
Yeah.
Great job. You are so good.
Thank you
so much for putting that together. So what's the takeaway for us then, who are moving forward and are active musicians and are in this field? You mentioned like educating our audiences, so telling our fan base, please buy my album when you come to my gig, educating them that. What are some other hopeful tactics for us to use for those of us that we want to continue on in this climate?
I think educating audiences, I don't think people really understand. And when you tell them, buy my record, even just explaining why it's different from streaming it and showing them the different amounts that you're making, that's really important. I do think writing to government, I think the government right now they've gone on a platform of being Creative Canada, so they're actually really looking to listen to us. For artists, this idea of being honest, I think it not only does it help your brand. I think everyone's struggling with what social media is supposed to look like, and this is what this person does, so I better do that. But I think more and more, because of that, we need to be even more honest about who we are and making sure those decisions are right. So do you have to have a presence on every platform out there? Maybe you're just a great photographer, so you want to have Instagram, and that's where you feel like that's something you want to do. Or maybe you don't want to do any of that at all. I mean, the problem is that you sort of get faced with that slippery slope of, okay, I'll do this, then what else can I do? But, I think being honest, number one, and what you're comfortable with. Don't do 10 things sort of badly in terms of social media. Do one really strongly and focus on your art. Did that help?
Yeah, thank you so much.
I've got some more, and there's some more on my pamphlet on my website if you want to go check that.
You were mentioning how the soundtracks that you had on Doyle and other things like that, you don't get paid for them. Is it because it's published in Canada? Like if you published your music in a country where the law, like France or something like that, and then would you get compensation for it? Is it because it's published in Canada?
It has to do with the production company and that it comes out in, it's a Canadian production.
So, but if it was a Canadian production, but it was published in
if the Public Doyle was filmed and made in Australia,
oh,
I would get paid.
Oh,
I would get paid for that.
It's the public, yeah.
And the composer gets paid every time.
Right.
I mean, this is a funny thing too. As I know, as a session musician, I get hired a lot because I can sight read, but I can also improvise, and that leads to a lot of gray because then suddenly I'll be with the composer who'll say, "Well, here I wrote these chords. Can you write a melody?" And now, well, but I'm a session player. Like, you're not giving me a score. I'm improvising, so who actually created it? I mean, that's a whole other gray area, and that's come up quite a lot. Yeah, and I think it's something to think about when you're an improviser, especially probably a lot of jazz musicians. That's what you do when you're called in, and part of your expertise is that you can do that, but you need to negotiate that in your fee. Yeah.
Thank you so much for bringing up the copyright reform. I actually work for Resound. And I just want to maybe add on to that a little bit for anyone that is thinking about writing to their MP. One really important thing that I think needs to change is that the Copyright Board has no deadline to make decisions. And that's particularly important in our very fast-changing music industry because, when they're looking at things like streaming, they took 5 years to make a decision, and then it was completely different than when they first.
Yeah, the lag time is crazy. It's a whole could be a career in there.
Totally.
Yeah.
So if there's one thing you're going to say when you write to them is tell them we need a 6-month deadline. I think the U.S. has a 6-month deadline for decisions.
That's a great point. Timely manner.
And it's not just the Copyright Board, but it's also the Copyright Act. So both of those things need to be changed, and I would definitely thank you so much for bringing that up because I think it's really important that everyone write in.
Yes, I absolutely do. Yeah, that's a great point. Resound's excellent, by the way. I know there's some changes in the works that are exciting, and I think that will benefit creators. So thank you.
What are some groups that are, sorry, I don't really know how to word this, but I'd love to email my MP and the government and talk about these things. What are some larger organizations already doing this? I don't know, I'm wording it really poorly.
No.
It's one thing for me just to do it, but what was the group you're a part of, sorry?
Resound.
Resound?
Resound, yeah. So for anyone that doesn't know, Resound is an organization that administers neighboring rights. So for any of you that aren't songwriters and are session musicians that are on recordings, neighboring rights actually compensates you for that mechanical recording. We license businesses that use music in a commercial setting. So if you're not aware of that right, you might actually have royalties owing to you. You can check our website and look online and see. You can check out your repertoire on there.
Sorry, can you just say Resound and I don't know if we're getting the audience picked up.
Yeah, sign up for Resound. If you have neighboring rights, if you're a neighboring rights holder, you've played in other things, go to Resound's website because you might actually have money owing to you that come in, and they're modernizing in a really quick way to try to to try to cut out more middlemen and make this flow easier and right into your pocket. So resound. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on net neutrality and how that's going to impact our market and our social media aspect?
I don't think we have time for that. Again, I think just as humans, we should all be a little more skeptical. And actually, I want to go back for 1 second because to that point is following the money. Your question about are there other groups doing this? Yeah, but they're lobbying for themselves. We are our own little small businesses. We need to lobby for ourselves. So there are other people who are asking for things from the government, but you also have to think about, well, why do they want that? So this is a really important thing. I'm actually, I'm inspired by this. I'm going to go and post, I think it's on my website actually already. I wrote a letter about Copyright Board reform and Copyright Act reform. It's on my website under advocacy. I wrote it and I got 100 signatures of other artists, including Alan Doyle, Joel Plaskett, Jim Cuddy. And it's up there. You can see what I wrote. And even if you just take that letter and copy it and flip it to your MP and say, I also signed this letter, or I'm interested in doing this. There's another campaign that's called Focus on Creators, focusoncreators.ca. And again, it's about having a timely revision of the Copyright Act and Copyright Board reform. And if you can sign up there, it's not just musicians, it's writers, it's anyone who has a stake in the creative industry. So focusoncreators.ca is another organization. But again, I think this filter of skepticism is one that we really need to start using more as to, well, why do these people want net neutrality? Why do these people not want it? And then and follow the money back.
Have you done work with the musicians union? Because I mean, part of my observation is that ACTRA is such a strong union as opposed to the music. I mean, maybe I shouldn't be saying this out loud, but
oh no.
Really, like the power of the musicians union versus ACTRA seems to be. You were saying your MP was telling you more actors have approached you. Well, they're part of a very strong union.
Yes. Yeah.
Or I'm just curious what you felt with that.
Well, it's interesting because I was a member of the union. I joined in 2001. I was in a show called Barrage, which is like S Club 7 with fiddles. And I hope not. This is a great thing. This is the great thing about being my age is that most of the stuff that I did when I was doing my 10,000 hours is not on the internet. Great. But I joined then, and I've had a really rocky history with the union. I believe so much in if we actually could all get together and agree, and we could be but the money isn't there. People undercut each other for gigs. I mean, Michael Murray, who's running the Toronto Music Union right now, is a really good brain. He's very, very smart. He sees the problems of what the union had been working for. The union is great if you're an orchestral member. The union is great. It would have been great 30 years ago when they still had the CBC orchestra. You would be making a lot of money. You actually would have been making a really fair wage. Right now, for a touring musician, I've spent the last 10 years on the road most of the time. I mean, they don't really do jack for me. And the thing is, the reason that I joined again was to make sure that I could get my visas to get to the US so I could work there. And then that was just another headache. And it's funny you mentioned the union because I did my first speech with the Economic Club, and I talked about my difficulties with the union. And a union representative was there and put up her hand and said, well, you said we charge a tax on this. And I said, well, okay, it's a fee. And she said, yes, it's a fee. So there's still, and somebody in the audience, I think it was Andrew Cash, who was an MP and also a musician, he said, well, the musicians union doing what they do best, they're fighting with their members, And I mean, I think that's a real shame. I'd love to be part of the change, but I don't have enough energy.
Oh yeah, no, I was wondering, because when you speak of the government, and I see that's one of your focuses, and I think of like in Europe, you can be a working musician and then have your money, your income subsidized, right? And is that anything you think we should try to get happening in Canada?
Yeah, or some of the things that they do in Ireland with tax, with some tax policies. Yeah, I mean, I wish we could make the union better, but I think the union needs to take a look inside of itself first, and then. I wish Michael Murray, he's got the hardest job in the world. Yeah. So, yeah.
I just floored recently. I was at a jazz concert and ran into my MP, who I'd never seen before. And she came over to me and started chatting me up. And I didn't even know she was aware of who the heck I was. And she said something about, she said, oh, we know who you are. She says, we love that you're in this community. And I said, what? And I'd like to know how to capitalize on that without, you know, to maybe go beyond what my own personal interests. And now that I've established that kind of relationship, she's following what I'm doing.
That's fantastic. That's number one. So you've done that by being you and being successful. Write to her, I think, immediately and say, great to see you. Thanks so much for supporting. There's also opportunities now to be witness on some of these hearings that are going to be coming up about your life, to go forward and talk to other people. So there's lots of, especially right now, I mean, we're right in the sweet spot. Just because they haven't made decisions and we got to hold them to the fire a little bit, but they also need to hear your experience about what it was like at this time, what it's like now, how can we change, how can we make this better. So I would say get in touch with her immediately.
I'm going to do that, thank you. It was weird because I'd never seen her at a public function or anything since she got elected. And what was happening was that night was a fellow who was performing that night had run as a constituent. And he withdrew, but they were there to show support, and I got sort of dragged into it.
Great.
So, hi, how are you?
Amazing, amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're like a Trojan horse. This is good.
Wasn't even looking for it.
I don't know if this is too meta level or whatever, but I think perhaps one of the problems is the government is very concerned with the economy and commodities that make money. And perhaps one of the reasons is because music as a commodity hasn't been recognized for its value versus, let's say, oil and resources or finance and banking, which the government seems to put a lot of money and support into. Now, I don't know if anyone in this room has heard of K-pop. I myself don't like K-pop too much, but I am of Korean heritage. I've been exposed to it. What blows me away about K-pop is the amount of support it gets from the Korean government. And the reason is it makes a big load of money. It does, like tons. So the government has recognized this and says, oh, there's high tech, there's Samsung, Hyundai, and K-pop.
Huh.
It's on that same level.
Well, I think we're at a place with, that's interesting.
Can we, in Canada, push towards this recognition?
I think we're at a place right now, and it's interesting because I've been privy to a lot of meetings with the Heritage Committee and some policy makers. They always like to reference Drake and The Weeknd. Right now, we do have a lot of Canadians up on the charts, and I'm so proud of Drake and The Weeknd. That's great, but it's not really how most of us live. So, but we at least, that's one thing that they're seeing, that there is success, there is money there. Another thing that has been done, there was a great study done on music cities, and you can find it on Music Canada's website. And what it does is it shows the economic benefits of music in a country. So it's showing, when you put on a concert, this many people went and ate food at restaurants around here, and they stayed in the town, and they spent money, and they did tourist activities. So music and culture is a huge economic driver, a huge economic force, and can never be put aside by that. And if you want to lead with any of your MPs or letters, or when you're talking to your MPs or anybody about this, you can point out that music and culture are a huge economic drive. And there's a study to prove this that has been done, and you can find that on the Music Canada website. Yeah.
I'm not a musician. I'm like the arts side. So, for any insight to the social media from the visual arts, you ever talk to artists, like outside of musicians? Do you meet with artists, people who design your CDs?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, my friend Kate Domina, who is a fantastic painter, I hired her to do my logo for my record label. It's amazing. It's basically me with a lion's hat on. It's very good. But I watch her on social media. She is fantastic. I mean, all of her stuff looks great. She's got a
Does she spread it out? Does she focus on Instagram?
She does Instagram. I believe she's on Twitter and Facebook, but mainly Instagram. One of the things I love about hers is that she doesn't, it's not always about finished product. She does a lot of intermediary stuff, like different drafts and canvases as they're starting in different processes. I think that's another thing about educating our audience is I don't think a lot of people know how a song starts. Like I was looking through this when I was writing down and I realized, oh, I wrote my notes for this talk, and then in the middle are sort of some sketches of a song that I was working on and just sort of flip past it. But I think a lot of people don't know what that part is, and to let them in on that process is actually a real privilege. So
I've been looking at performing with musicians as an option. So
that'd be
I would
cool.
paint to their event.
Yeah.
Anyone.
Put yourself out there. I had a live painter at my very first CD release party, and it was so neat. I mean, I didn't get to watch most of it because I was singing, but at the end it looked neat. Yeah.
I can actually add to that because I'm a painter too. You can't search on a painting, but you can search on text. So what you have to do is associate lots of text or narratives with your work. Then it becomes searchable.
Hashtags, I guess, is that
well,
what you mean?
hashtags, but even if you've got poetry, and you could have somebody else, a friend who's a poet, you associate something with that, because otherwise they can only search by your name. If they don't know your name, they can't search it. But text, and the more text, the better. And that's how you make it show.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Associating text with the images to be searchable. That's a great idea. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been inspiring.
Miranda Mulholland, one more.
Folks, so I've been a terrible host. I forgot to do a really important thing. And you'll know because there's a big fat exit sign right there. Anyway, there. I did it. What we're going to do...
I don't even know who that is.
can find your group on the website. I can find Google Blackburn and yeah, that'd be great.
But it's not Blackburn. Just look up Blackburn.
And you got any up when your kids are.
Yeah. Our tour, I don't know what's going to happen. So actually, we're doing a lot of shows. I don't know. In my business, you got to have an album out every 3 years. So every 2.5 years, 3 years. And we're on our 3rd year kind of thing before we're releasing another record. So that's how you get your festivals. Every festival wants you to sell product. So if you've done a festival before, you sell your product, you're not going to sell too much. But we're doing a lot of this things, so they don't know it, so it's new to them, so we're selling good product there. But basically,
is that because does the festival get a percentage of your product sold?
Yeah, but they also, yeah, they get the same. The problem with that is it's mainly because you have something new.
Yeah.
What area are you from? Niagara. We are. I'm doing something in Niagara. Oh, I'm doing the Trias Jazz Festival.
Yeah, and it's
Trias
I'm so
Blues,
glad you
Blues and Jazz.
So like I work in licensing, and it's like really frustrating because we aren't able to like plug in sessions.
They just booked us.
Yeah, and we're trying to like explain to people. It hasn't been recertified in like 5 years, and we're like, yeah, but we still should.
Yeah.
So it's like so frustrating.
Yeah. When I get my
Yeah.
That's a cool combo.
What
carrier?
Oh, really?
The rates and everything.
The one thing I think is important is we need more artists on board.
Great job, by the way.
Thank you. I'm only attracting artists. And that makes it better. I have an artist involved. And we know artists are on board. That's actually what I've been waiting to talk about this year. Yeah. Oh, well, there you go. It's going to be probably, although they have one.
And then it's at the top of the bigger station. I think it's Niagara.
Yeah.
Now I definitely heard this.
Yeah, man. Well, I play every weekend at this Nolan's Jazz Bar. Like Nolan's Jazz Yeah, when I'm in Toronto, like 8:30 to 12, play a trio on Friday, guitar, bass, and drums.
Check.
And then a quartet on Saturday.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I apologize for the lowness of the chairs. I kind of like it. It's like I'm a kid again. I'm here with the magnificent Matt Stevens, who's flown in from Ottawa, actually. You're a New Yorker, though. Matt Stevens is a New Yorker. I'm just going to do a quick little bio of Matt. This is a remarkable individual in contemporary jazz. He plays with all sorts of people we've heard of and love. Including Esperanza Spalding, Christian Scott, and others. He is an example of a guy who's moved to New York and done really well. He's going to have insights in that regard. He tours all over the world. He is both the sideman to famous folks and also a solo artist of note. He's done, a remarkably successful jazz musician. So I'm sure he's going to have some wisdom about how jazz is going right now. The other thing about Matt that we had a kind of pre-interview thing, and this gentleman here, I don't know, maybe you've changed since we talked a month ago. Maybe now you're really sour and pessimistic. But Matt was incredibly positive and hopeful about the way things are working. I did mention a little bit about that in my introductory remarks. Anyway, please give it up for my new friend Matt Stevens.
Thank you guys so much.
Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be
I can't hear you. That's not loud enough. Gain? I don't know anything.
Check, check, check. How's
Go?
that? That sounds a bit better.
Can you hear me? Okay. All right.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming.
So, Matt, you are much younger than I. I'm just going to say it.
I don't know.
No, I think so. And congratulations on having a 1.5-year-old child. Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
You've been at it for a long time, though, music. Can you tell me, let's go back so people get a sense of who you are. Tell me about your upbringing. Was there music in your family? All that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. But growing up, I grew up in the East End of Toronto, and there was music in my family. My father played guitar in the house, and there was lots of music playing all the time. And my mother just retired this year after teaching at the National Ballet School for 40 years. And so I grew up going to the ballet very often and being exposed to all sorts of music pretty early on. And started taking Suzuki piano lessons with a friend's mother at about 7, and switched to guitar at 12. You know?
Wow.
Yeah.
And when did it clue in? I mean, you were playing music so young. When did it clue in that this is what I wanted? This is what I want to do. At what point in your life did you say, "This is it. Music is the thing. I'm a musician"?
When I found out that I wasn't going to be good enough to play Major League Baseball.
So how?
So yeah, so I was enjoying playing guitar and playing in bands in middle school, and around I was about 14, and I remember I did 2 years at Malvern Collegiate, and then I transferred to a different school. But while I was at Malvern, I played in a band, and I'm sure many of you remember all those Battle of the Bands things where you would have to go around and sell your friends tickets for $10. And I did one.
Did you do one at the concert hall?
At the Opera House.
Oh yeah, okay, so
yeah.
East End, yeah.
And at Queen and Broadway, I guess, and at Broadview, and
New Yorker.
So yeah, and all of our friends came, and I had the best time of my life, and we won, and I thought, this is the coolest thing ever. I just want to do this.
Can I ask what kind of music it was? What kind of band it was?
I mean, it was a rock and roll band, and I mean, we were just trying to play like all the cool bands that we liked at the time, like Soundgarden and Nirvana and Alice in Chains and things like that. Yeah, and at that point, I just kind of went with it, and I was playing baseball seriously up until about 16, and then I was always good enough to I could make the rep teams, but then I would just ride the bench all year, and so then I said, well, maybe I'm better at guitar than playing baseball, so I'll stick with this.
I have a feeling it was probably obvious to everyone that you were destined to be a guitar player. I have that feeling. You were already pretty good, weren't you? Can you name for me? I find this a really interesting question because musicians, like you just said about Soundgarden and stuff. Sometimes I find musicians, the music, the artists that influence them, aren't always what you think. So can you name two or three formative musical experiences, concerts or records, that shaped you as a musician?
Yes. The first one would be hearing Jimi Hendrix Band of Gypsies live at the Fillmore at my house. Another one that has stuck with me, and I thought about this before coming to talk to you, was they used to have concerts. Do you guys remember those concerts they had at the Science Center? way back when, and I was
actually Jazz FM91 used to do a bunch of concerts there. Yeah.
They did. I think it was that. And so I was in high school, and I went and I saw Ed Bickert play with Steve Wallace and Mike Murley, and I was like, this is unbelievable. And I'd been playing guitar for a while, and I was like, I know how to play guitar. I got it. And then I saw that, and I was like, I do not have it. And that was really exciting to me. That's two. I'll think of another one sometime along the way.
You haven't had any of their musical experiences. That's it. You
Yeah.
only have those two.
That's right.
Now, it is almost a cliche that, I'm going to be a famous musician. I'm going to make it. Whatever. I'm going to move to New York City. And you know what? I did that. I didn't become a famous musician, but I was in a band in the '90s. We moved to New York City. What made you move there? Can you just talk about the history and how you got there?
Yeah, it was sort of circumstantial. So when I transferred from Malvern Collegiate to the Etobicoke School of the Arts out in the West End, and
Yeah, that's where my kid goes.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, I liked going to high school there a lot. It was really fun. And I would take the subway across town every morning. And so I remember at the time, I don't know if it's still this way, but you could go to the University of Toronto like a year early. You didn't have to do your OAC year if you were going to be a musician. And me and my close friend, a piano player named James Reynolds, both had applied to go there in 12th grade, and I didn't get in, and so I was like, oh man, what am I going to do? We were talking about this before, and I was a teenager, and I'm just going to hang out with my girlfriend all summer is what I'm going to do. I'm okay. I'm not going to go. And I, at my mother's suggestion, I went to Berklee College of Music. Has this thing called Guitar Week, and I sent the tape, and I got a scholarship to go to that. And then while I was there, I was invited to audition for the school, and I got a scholarship to go, and so to live in Boston when I got there. And so with that and the help of my parents, I went to Berklee and was there for 3 years. And then when we finished school, just all the people that I'd been playing with and developing a musical relationship with, we said, oh, let's just go get an apartment in New York. That's what everybody's doing, so that's what we did.
Was it tough? I mean, my experience of living in New York was obviously all the things are true. It's brutally expensive. What was it just like? Let's find an apartment, and you found it. Whereabouts in New York were you living? And
it wasn't like that at all. So I remember going, I think we should live in Brooklyn because that's what's cool, And
Brooklyn's
so,
the bomb, yeah.
Yeah, and so we started off in Brooklyn Heights, and this is like the early 2000s, and so just looking up endless apartments online. And so we were walking into realtors' offices, and we would go into one in Brooklyn Heights and go, okay, we can't afford any of these, and then we'd go one neighborhood south and go, we still can't afford this, and then we still couldn't afford it. And so we ended up like right at the very bottom of Brooklyn in a neighborhood called Bay Ridge, which is like the one neighborhood over from Bensonhurst, where like Larry King is from, and like Sammy Gravano buried tons of bodies and stuff. So,
did you find any bodies? No.
No, but I actually did read Sammy Gravano's autobiography while living in that neighborhood. There were all these landmarks, and I was like, wow, this is cool. And so we were kind of in the middle of nowhere. But I think that the difference for me, what I feel really fortunate about, is that when I moved there, I had a touring gig with a trumpet player, Christian Scott, and so that I didn't need much money. My rent was cheap and my overhead was low, and so I just needed enough money to have the time to practice and to hang out and to try to just do the thing. And so there was enough happening for me, even with just that gig, to like prevent me from having to get a job at Starbucks or something like that, and to just get by. And so that was a real boon for me.
We'll get back to Christian Scott because you just threw that out there. I just happened to have a gig touring around.
He was a friend. I went to school with him.
Can you discuss, because New York City has a real mystique. There's like a Big Apple mystique. I touched on it a moment ago. It's like where you go to make it, blah, blah, blah. There's a famous Frank Sinatra song, etc. Can you discuss some of the, in your experience, some of the pros and cons of New York music life and that Big Apple mystique and how you see it and how your experience versus that mystique and stuff like that? What's good and bad about your experience of being a musician in New York?
Well, for me, I think that you know, at the time, again, it was before YouTube was a ubiquitous thing, and you had a sense of what everybody was doing and what the global level was in terms of musicianship. And so for me, it was just like a really great place to go and be face to face with the actual level of playing that was necessary to have a career that wasn't centered around one place, one city, you know. And that was really exciting to me. And also, I think that there's like, I remember growing up here, and there was a thing that was sort of like, oh, are you ready to go to New York? You know, when are you going to be ready to go? You have to be ready to go to New York. And I've always thought that was bullshit. You know, it was sort of, it's a great place to learn and to be inspired and to kind of hone your craft and to develop what you're doing, and to gain experience, right? Which is the most important thing, I think, for any young musician is just to have experiences playing, which then can be the bad side of a city like New York, where if you're spending all your time just surviving and you don't have the time to play or to practice or to get together and develop something with your peer group and to play and to go on the road and stuff like that, then it sort of defeats the purpose of being there somewhat, in my opinion. And I think that can be a downside for a lot of people, and I've seen a lot of people struggle with that.
You've had increasingly like incredible success as a sideman, which I think is very interesting, not only as a sideman but as a soloist as well. How, like if we were to develop, say, a toolkit for getting into a world of being a side person, being hired, being on a gig, if there was like skills that you think that musicians should hone to be able to be successful at that, can you discuss some of the skills you think you would sort of give advice to jazz musicians in that regard?
Yeah. To me, I think that they're applicable regardless of the genre that you're playing in. But, I mean, of course, there are all the obvious ones of being, you know, being on time and being prepared and having spent, you know, a lot of time doing that. And then also something that people often talk about but is really true is being someone that's easy to be around. And it's not an easy thing to be on the road a lot, and I mean, I'm sure that many of you have toured as well, and it's not easy. It can be pretty taxing, and so I think it's really important that the people that you're traveling with are people that you want to have a drink with or have dinner with at the end of the night, and that you're not sort of going off and into your separate rooms at the end of the night and just not wanting to hang out with each other. So I think that just being socially aware of the needs of other people and you know, the vibe that you're bringing to the situation is really, really important. Beyond that, it's really interesting because I've thought about this element a lot, which is that it's not unlike other jobs in that it's oftentimes that first thing that is the hardest, that first job that's the hardest one to get. But that job then, that experience then leads to other opportunities, right? So there are so many great musicians coming out of all these programs, like all over the world every year. And oftentimes the question that I have is like, who's going to be the person, who's going to be the established musician that gives them an opportunity to be heard and to play, and therefore sort of deems them a viable candidate for other jobs, you know? And I think that that's too bad that it's that way. I don't think that that's necessarily how it should work at all. And increasingly there are fewer people who are in a position to hire somebody to pay them a living wage and take them on the road for however many gigs a year, and to kind of like, you know, knight them a viable choice for somebody you can hire in your band. I think that that's less and less the case. And so there's all kinds of really interesting examples of bands coming out and having a lot of success and performing and making great music who are just groups of friends. You know, there's a couple of bands that come off the top of my head are Snarky Puppy and Bad Bad Not Good, you know, talking in this sort of like crossover jazz world. I mean, and these are guys that just, to my mind, have invested in going, okay, we want to do this. Our door is not being, you know, knocked down by such and such established musician to take me on tour. And plus, I'd rather play with my friends anyways, and so let's invest in one another. I think that's a really good thing, but I'm sort of getting off topic. So getting that first chance, I think, is really important, but then it's like, okay, well, how do you get that? And of course, that is like, it's different for everybody. It's so circumstantial. In my own experience, whenever I try to sort of chart someone else's course, it's just a disappointment. and it's frustrating, and I feel the need to kind of just center myself and get back on my own track. But I think that you know, once you establish a certain level of proficiency and skill on your instrument, I think it's really a smart thing to do to look at yourself and go, okay, or listen to yourself rather than say, what are the things about my playing that make me unique? And being able to identify those things and then grow those things out and to develop those things rather than always looking to other examples of people playing at a high level and saying, well, this guy plays really well, so I should just play like that, you know, because that seems to be what's popular, and I can make a go of it if I just do what this guy's doing. That never works. And I think that the more you can kind of record yourself and listen back to yourself and go, okay, well, damn, that's something that I find myself doing, you know, when I'm improvising, and that's unique to me, because we all have those things that make our you know, musical selves unique. And so if you can identify it and extricate it and then, you know, cultivate it and develop it, I think that's a really wise thing to do. At least it has been something for me. Yeah, and you know, and then I think the last thing I'd like to say about that is that, to me, like the level of musicianship that is out there right now, just technically speaking, is ridiculously high. It's insane. It's sort of like pro sports. Like the longer it exists, the higher the level gets. You know, like, you know, I mean, no one was getting drafted into the NBA from high school in 1968. You know, it just wasn't happening. And now I think, you know, music is not unlike that. And especially, you know, in the United States, that was really striking to me when I moved there. And it was really different from Canada in that there is a system, not unlike football, where you're like, if somebody shows some promise as a very young player, there's an institutional path for them from almost immediately for them to kind of go through all these camps and programs and end up with a full ride to any, you know, the top 3 schools, and then they're going to get a great gig coming out of school. And I know all those guys, and I was just like, wow, you guys have all known each other since you were like 9. That's wild to me, you know? It was really, really different from any experience that I had here. So when the level is so high, technically speaking, it becomes more about not, you know, if you can do it, but how you do it, right? And so that's an important distinction, at least it has been for me, you know?
So it's about developing a recognizable imprint, an identity that's your own as a player.
Certainly.
But there's a balance, because also you are still, I assume, competing, if that's the right word, at a certain level, expected level of technical efficiency. But then
I think so. Yeah. So I think that it is on you to hold yourself to a certain standard, in terms of just technique and command of your instrument. And I'm not someone that has thought that that's ever been something that gets in the way of musical expression or improvisation. It only facilitates it. The stronger I've become technically, the better I feel at improvising, and then the more ideas I'm able to, kind of wrap my head around.
So practice, in other words, yes.
Practice.
Make sure. You mentioned, I think this is kind of getting to the crux of the matter. When you entered into the world of jazz and professional jazz, how it was different from now. How has it changed over the years for you? The jazz world, the music world, the touring world. What kind of things have changed? What do you see as do you see a straight line trajectory? How have things changed?
So when I graduated school, it was 2004, 2005, and like I said, the first road gig I had was with Christian Scott, and he was the last guy of my sort of generation that I knew that signed a major record deal, like a multi-record deal with a major label with a good advance and a good budget to make a record, and then. Literally within a few years of that no longer existed. And so for me personally, in terms of the two records that I put out and basically everybody else that I work with, well, not everybody, but a lot of other people that I work with, it's never been an option to have that kind of support. And so it's interesting. It's never like I've never been like a back in the day kind of guy, because I just wasn't there for that, And so it's not something that I can miss because I never experienced it, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So in terms of touring, it's been relatively the same for me in terms of number of dates. If anything, it's grown, but I think that just has a functionality of me getting older and more experienced. Certainly the business model for how, as Miriam was saying, it's really changed over the years. And I mean, I can't speak to it the way that she has, but I mean, the people who did benefit from like an incredible amount of label support at any time in their career, of course it helps them as they transition into becoming independent artists as well.
Do you spend, so this model, so you're saying that things, since you've entered, I mean, because to my mind, even, because things move so quickly now, even 10 years, like, things have changed. For example, how much time do you spend engaged in social media? Do you have someone doing that for you, or do you do it yourself? And how much time a day, say, do you spend doing that, and is it important?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because it's something that I've thought about a lot, because I don't enjoy doing it, for one. It's something that I feel obligated to do.
Does anyone enjoy spending time on social media, promoting themselves and stuff? You do? Yeah, you see there's like 2 in the room. I've met very few, so that's an interesting point. Yeah.
You can hire me.
Great. Yeah, it's not. I have no problem with it. I think it can be a really useful tool. But for myself, it's not something that I get a lot of enjoyment out of. However, I also think that it's a slippery snake, and it works really differently for different people. And again, trying to sort of apply like a catch-all tactic is just chasing a ghost. Much like how does one become a professional musician? It's so different for everybody. And I can think of examples of like I have a friend who's in an indie band called the Mountain Goats, and they'll go and sell they'll sell out 2 nights at Shepherd's Bush in the UK, and they have like 1,500 Instagram followers, and then I know people who have like 20,000 Instagram followers and have no touring life at all. And so I don't know what that means, but I know that it's weird, and it doesn't really add up to something that we can study with any certainty. And so, as it's Miriam, right?
Miranda.
Miranda, I'm so sorry.
Thanks,
As Miranda was saying, you know, you have to find, I think it's just really important that you find out what works for you specifically, and that you're able to find a voice that feels natural to you and a way of doing it that feels natural to you, because otherwise people will sniff that out. It won't be functional anyways. And I'm not certain as to the impact it does or does not have. I think it really depends on the artist.
You keep just getting at it, just finishing their program. And let's say they're Torontonians. Let's say there are people in this room here. What do you say? Because again, in my introductory remarks, I said that there is a cliche right now that everything is terrible. That don't become a musician. You know, you're not going to be able to live. It's impossible. And yet on the phone, you and I had a little talk, and you were much more hopeful, and there was positivity coming out of you, and I found it refreshing and interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe you have brain damage. I don't know what it is.
That's right.
But I would like you to go down that path a little bit, because at these kind of business seminars, it is very typical, across the board, not just jazz, to have a negativity. And you weren't speaking that way to me before. You saw things.
Am I speaking that way now?
No, but we haven't gotten there. I'm trying to get there.
I mean, it's difficult to say, but I mean, gosh, I think that for me, things always took a lot longer than I would have thought they would or would have liked them to have, and so I know that it can be really difficult depending on who your parents are or who you hang out with. Like, you know, the more support you have in terms of people saying, this is a good idea that you're doing this, and not what the hell are you thinking, the better off you're going to be in terms of your ability to sustain hanging in. And I don't know why, but I've often had this like really weird visual metaphor in my mind, and I'm just going to tell you. So I've always imagined just like all these musicians being like monkeys hanging from like a bar, and like all these people are like just like tickling their underarms with feathers, and the ones that can not let go of the bar are the people that end up kind of, you know, staying the course and doing well.
That sounds like fun. I'd like to be one of those monkeys, actually.
I don't know why it's that, but it is. It's just the truth. Yeah, I think it's important to look at your options beyond just staying in your hometown. Or I really would encourage you all to demystify New York City. I don't think that everybody needs to move to New York. I certainly don't think you need to be in New York to be a successful musician by any stretch. I think what's important is that you have a really clear-eyed view of where you're at, what you're good at, what you need to work on, and that you hold yourself to that standard, regardless of whether or not you're like a big fish in a small pond, or if you're getting all the gigs that you think you should or shouldn't get in town. And I think that, you know, school can be really, really good for that. I think that when I went through school, I didn't feel like I came out on the other side like a formed player. And I mean, I still don't. It's something that's in process forever. But I did feel like I had the tools to practice, and I knew how to get better on my own without people, needing to be monitored to do that. So I think that if you really want to do it, and you're certain that you want to do it, and you can persevere, and that you know how to improve on your own, that there's a place for you in this, you know. And I think that you know, no two places look exactly the same, or even resemble one another even remotely sometimes. But that doesn't mean that one is better than the other. The goal here is to just provide at least for me, the goal has always just been to be able to keep doing it. And I think that if you're in that position, then you're doing really, really well, right? Like, do you get to wake up and go to your studio and write songs and, you know, play with people that you want to play with? If you're doing that, whether it's you know, internationally or at home or centered around like a smaller geographic region or whatever, you're doing well, and that to me is success. Success is just getting to do what you want to do, more or less.
So is it about expectations then?
I think it's a lot about expectations. Yeah.
I think that's excellent advice. Wonderful. Speaking of expectations, could you talk about what you're working on now? And I know you've had quite an amazing year with your record. Can you just talk about your current projects and what's going on in the future for you? Because it's fascinating stuff.
Sure. So last year, my second record came out, and we were touring that for most of last year. And in the fall, I was writing and playing and producing a record with Esperanza Spalding called Exposure, and it was an interesting project where we made this record in 3 days, and it was all live streamed on Facebook.
The recording of it was live streamed.
Yes,
wow.
and then records were pre-ordered and mailed out at the end of that. So and then this year I just finished I finished a collaborative record with a great tenor saxophone player named Walter Smith III and Marcus Gilmore and Harish Raghavan and a really exciting vibraphone player from Chicago named Joel Ross, who's just who I've just learned about, and that record's coming out in the fall. And then I'm working on and producing a record with called Social Science with Terry Lynn Carrington and Aaron Parks, and that'll be out in the fall too, and so we'll be touring those records in the fall, and in the meantime I'm working on a new trio record that'll be out next year.
So as I said before, you're lazy.
Yes.
Here's the thing. We're gonna wrap up in a minute and open the floor for questions.
Yeah, please.
You just sort of directed me to a place I think that's also important: recording. How important is recording? It's interesting, James B., who works here at the station, talks about how jazz is just about the only place anymore where CDs work, where people buy CDs and where it makes sense. What kind of advice would you have for people in terms of how important it is to have a record? Is it more important, for example, to have a full-length record or to have just some tunes that can play? How high-end should it be if you're just starting out? Do you have any advice around that stuff?
Yeah, well, I think that when we all saw Kanye West pull his record off of Spotify last year to remix it and then put it back on, that indicated to me that it's just like anything goes. And I think that's cool. I think that people spend their entire career just releasing single after single, or alternate between LPs and EPs. I think that like a lot of the music that younger improvising musicians are making can kind of function and do fine in any format, you know? And a lot of people that I know and work with are releasing just digital, although it's incredibly expensive and breakable. But I think recording is really important because, well, for two reasons. Because number one, the most important reason it is artistically is because it's how you get better.
Interesting.
I think that hands down, it's the best way to improve. It's like looking in a mirror, and I think that I'm sure you guys can relate. Like when you start, when you record, you know, in the early days of playing, there's like this thing that happens where you're like, holy shit, what? I sound like that? I thought I sounded like John Scofield. I sound terrible, you know? It's like, and there's like this huge chasm, like this big disconnect between what you think you sound like and what you actually sound like. And so to me, I think there's like, it's really important to bridge that gap over time. And as you record yourself, you just get a clearer and clearer idea as to, you know, what it is that you actually sound like, which is, to me, how you get better. And so it's like, you know, shortening that. And then beyond that, in a practical level, in terms of just earning a living, if you're, you know, so for instance, like you can't, Miranda was talking about a record cycle being 2 years. That's if you're like really lucky and really well known. Mostly it's like, most of the time I would argue that it's more 12 to 18 months. And you really can't go to Europe unless you're a huge name, or you know, you can't. It's hard to tour internationally on one record more than like twice in a year. And then the following year, they're looking to what it is that you have coming out that year. You know, like if you, you know, if you go to Japan, one year for one record in support of one record, the next year you need to be coming back with another record. And so it serves, it's really important in terms of how it serves as a calling card to be able to get out there on the road and to earn your living that way. You need to make music.
So, you talk about, to me it sounds like there's a balance, and like with everything with the speed of things these days, putting out singles constantly, all that stuff. So what about the quality of the recording? Because we get, the advice we give to musicians is, if you're going to send something to Jazz FM91, it's got to sound polished and fantastic, So do you agree with that, or is it important, or should you just be putting out on your website demos, and what do you think is the most important thing to think about in terms of whether it's high end or not, the quality of the recording, the production?
I think the music really dictates that. So, to me, like there's I think the material and the songs really dictate the production level needed for a recording. So I think you just have to use your judgment as a musician. And I mean, if you're making like an acoustic piano trio record, I think that if you're the same way that you hold yourself to a certain standard as a musician, I mean, if you're, I think you need to go, okay, well, what does this sound like in relation to other records that I think sound good, that are of this ilk? And if it's in the ballpark, then okay. That's cool. I'll send that around. And if it's not, then you have some work to do. Whereas, like I think that lots of people. I mean, I have lots of friends in New York who are and in Toronto who are on the not in the jazz scene but in the rock scene. And there's a real and they all make records in their bedrooms and they sound fantastic and they really fit the vibe of the music that they're making. So I think that there's no one way to make a record, and the way that you do it really depends on the music that you're making. And I have a studio myself, and I've recorded certain things there that I'm really happy with how they come out, and I think it serves its purpose. And other things that I would never record there. It really just depends on the music.
And just one last question. We'll open it up to questions. You talked about how when you first started, there were major labels interested in jazz, and there just aren't anymore. How are you getting your recordings out there? I'm just curious. What's going on with your recordings?
So I've had 2 different labels who have been distributing my music in the United States and in Europe, and basically, so the first label was an English label called Whirlwind, and they distributed my music in the U.S. and in Europe, and licensed it to a label called P-Vine in Japan. And then this last one that came out on a label called Rope-A-Dope, which licensed it to a different label in Japan to come out there, and they distributed it in the United States and in Europe. And then I've been really fortunate because I have a friend in Montreal who manages Metric and Grimes and has his own record label. And when there's when he has any budget left over from Emily Haynes records, he throws it my way and puts out my music in Canada. And so that's been really, really great for me. And he's been really supportive. So that's how my records have come out.
Thank you, Matt Stevens.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Do we have any questions for Matt? Yes.
So you're talking about writing with various artists, and I'm curious about your writing process. Do you have an idea and then approach musicians, or do you approach musicians and get ideas together?
I'm just going to re-ask the question a bit. Just asking about the writing process. When you collaborate with other artists, how does it go? Do you approach them with an idea? Do they approach you? Is there a kind of formula for that? Am I right? Is that yeah?
It really depends on the situation and on the artist. And even on the moment, like speaking about Esperanza, we collaborated on a song on my last album, and I had it completely written and recorded, and I sent it to her, and she wrote a lyric and added some melodic content, and then we just recorded her at a friend of mine's studio, singing over top of what we'd already recorded. Other times we've just gotten together and either one of us would just have an idea, and whether it's just a little melodic fragment or a rhythmic fragment or a chord progression, and it'll just spark an idea. So with this project that I'm working on with Terry and Aaron, it's a little bit like people are bringing in finished material and then making suggestions. Often that's the case. That was more how it functioned with Christian Scott too, where we would just sort of all bring in almost completed music, and then of course be open to one another's criticism and things like that. But it really depends on the person and on the collaboration. But even when I'm just writing music myself, it starts. I can start from a lot of different places. Just a melodic idea, or a drum beat, or a chord progression, any number of things. I've been working more in a studio that I have with my band, and so the guys are getting way into Ableton and experimenting with
Ableton Live, which is the software.
Yep. Which is, and so now oftentimes an idea is starting from something that's been programmed.
I'd like to add something to what you said about recording, where to kind of let you know where you are and fast lane to improving.
Yeah.
I brought people into the studio who figured they were adequate musicians and everything. Oh, I'm not ready to be in the studio, I'm not ready to record. Well, okay, this isn't a for sale play. Let's just say rehearsal sessions recorded at a recording studio, played back, and the guy goes, holy cow, I sound like that. It also is encouraging to hear yourself over in a professional recording studio and not realize that this could be anyone playing. That it's encouraging to hear yourself sound good.
Absolutely, it can go that way too.
It gives you actual impetus to keep going.
Yep.
So
it's not just a negative thing to hear yourself. In other words, in the studio, you can also be encouraged. Yeah.
I've seen it many times. I bring younger musicians in, or even intermediate young, people in their early 30s or whatever, and who never did it. And all of a sudden, it's very encouraging to hear yourself sound good.
Yep, I would agree with that too.
Yeah, back there.
Hi. In math, in order to learn multiplication and division, you have to learn like plus and minus. There are steps learning a certain degree of the difficulty, right? Like in music, you go through major scales and you go into minor scales and whatnot. As I'm in school right now, a fourth year at Humber College, there are things that the fundamentals thrown at you, and you always, and when you're trying to practice that and try to absorb it, there are new things that thrown at you, and that your goal to achieve all of those materials thrown at you, it gets bigger and bigger, and once you're done school, the real life thrown at you, and how do you find time to practice that fundamentals to get to that point where you're satisfied, or you know what I mean?
Of course,
so, like,
absolutely.
How do you find balance where you're at is good, or I know like there's always room for improvement. So how do you find yourself in that?
I think that you're right on the money there, and I was touching on that a little bit before when I was saying that school, it can be really overwhelming for that reason. You're just constantly getting things thrown at you, and they pile up over time. And so that's why it's so important to know how to teach yourself, or how to improve on your own after school, because there's no way that you're going to be able to absorb all that information and be able to play it and perform it at a level that you're happy with when being given new things every other day. And so, in my experience, when you're really young, at least for me, I think it was hard to sort of to finish school and to like have some things going on and go, oh man, but there are these things that I'm hiding maybe, from myself, and I'm not looking, I'm not being really honest with myself about that really need some working on and some improvement. And so I think it's a combination of being really honest with yourself and seeing weaknesses, maybe some fundamental weaknesses in your understanding of how you're playing your instrument, and having the guts to address those things head on. And then also, like you're saying, shelving those things away. So as they come at you, go, okay, cool, I've made a note of this. I can't deal with this right now in this moment of time, but I'm going to have to go back and deal with it at some point, and I will make sure to do that. And knowing how to improve on your own is so important. I think that my biggest period of growth, and I mean, really, as we all know as musicians, it's an endless road, undeniably. But my so far, I think in my own life, my biggest period of growth was immediately after school, not during school. And of course, how you find the time to do all that stuff is really difficult. However, when it comes to practicing, again, in my own experience, there's a real difference between playing and practicing. And again, if you're honest with yourself, when you're doing one or the other, right? If you just sit down and you just pull out your instrument and you're just kind of like playing some stuff all of a sudden you can spend 4 hours and you haven't really addressed anything head on in the way that you maybe could have really benefited from. But if you're practicing in a really focused and strategic way, so say there's 5 things that you're working on, and they're all really hard for you. So if you don't waste that first hour, just kind of like, or not waste, but you know what I mean. If you have limited time and you're just really focused on improving on these very specific things, just make sure you're doing those specific things. And for me, I realized that I could get a lot more done in 90 minutes or 2 hours practicing with a lot of focus and strategy than just kind of pulling out my guitar and going, okay, I have 4 hours to just do whatever I want.
Who came up with the Esperanza idea for the live stream? Because I thought that idea was absolute genius, and it was a great way of bringing the audience in straight from the start. So how did you come up with the Esperanza come up with that idea, or who?
Wasn't me.
How did it evolve?
It was she spearheaded that thing entirely, and she got everybody on board, we were all terrified, and there was a lot of personal growth there for me. I felt like, man, this is...
Sorry, you're talking about the Esperanza Spalding live on YouTube. We're going to record the record in 3 days experience, right? Just so that people know it. Yeah, so it was her idea. She had a difficult time getting, I think, everybody on board. It turned out being an interesting thing. But she's pretty unique and remarkable in that way, in that she's really willing to just lay it all on the line in the name of sort of plumbing the depths of her artistic self, and that's guts, especially for somebody that actually has a lot to lose, in terms of a reputation and a legitimate fan base and stuff. And so people have asked me, was she really writing, those things in real time? And the answer is yes, she really was. And we'd done all these practice sessions where we were trying to finish songs in an hour, and none of the ideas from those sessions were recycled over those 3 days. So it was pretty amazing. And I felt really nervous going in, and I don't know that I would have said yes to anybody doing that,
Hi, Dan.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I'm a singer-songwriter. I'm not a jazz artist. So for a long time, I've relied on my voice and my songwriting, and I played a good rhythm guitar. But then I moved to Nashville, and I got really interested in why am I using 6 frets on my guitar? And it started to bother me enough that I started to learn. So I'm at the point where I know like the pentatonic scales, I know how to like hear a song and go, okay, it's in this key, and then find what pattern I'm at. And I'm just wondering if you can, beyond me going, okay, I'm gonna just pick this of my songs to try to do a solo, if there's any advice you could give me about maybe what to do next or maybe what to focus on. Simple stuff. I mean, I'm not
totally
looking to...
And you're, I'll try to keep this brief for those who aren't guitar players. But are you talking about like playing single note line, like single note improvisation lines? I would suggest, so once you've learned all your pentatonic scales, I think just learning, if you're just learning all your major scales in 12 keys on the entire instrument would be a really great thing to do.
Okay.
And you know, sort of being able, if you could learn all your major scales from the lowest diatonic note to the highest diatonic note in all 12 keys and play it fluidly, that would be great.
So C all the way up the fretboard. D,
right. Well, you'd starting on the lowest diatonic note.
Right.
It's not an open string, so on the guitar that would be F, you know,
right.
and then up to like a high D, you know, or and then going through the cycle of fifths, and you know, and I think that's a great way to start. Just a lot of the time, I think that like when you're wondering, gosh, you know, where do I even start with this stuff? And we've all been there. The key is often just the most simple things, and just really having a really strong command of the basic things like major scales.
Okay.
There you have it, folks. A guitar lesson from Matt Stevens. Told you you'd learn something.
Right. If you haven't learned anything else, there's that. Yes.
So I have a son that's in New York that's going through that. He did the school things, so he did the U of T jazz, and then he did the MSN thing. So he just got a few months left on his artist visa, and he's at the stage where you were talking earlier, I think, where he's just trying to survive, and he's frustrated that he can't really take advantage of why he thinks he's in New York. So what advice would you have that he should either focus on, go to, take advantage of in the few months he has left to really get what's different from New York, to really or to learn or anything?
Is he planning to come home? I mean, I don't mean ever. I mean, like after these 2 months.
Right? I think he's got a couple of months and they kick him out.
But did he do his practical training, his OP1 already, or his practical training visa?
That's where he's at now, I think.
So he could apply for an O1 visa, right? There's like so.
Actually get it though? I don't know if they're, okay, well, let him know. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if he wants to stay, you know, he could. There are visa options, you know. I know a great lawyer. I'll hook you up. Yeah, gosh, I think that.
Sorry, this is advice. Sorry, just to reiterate. Sorry, so advice. A person living in New York City, jazz musician who only has a couple of months left on his visa. How can he, you know, really take advantage of New York City in that time? This what New York City has to offer for a jazz musician. Does that kind of? Okay.
Well, if he's doing his master's at MSM. That's great. What's his name?
Brandon Davis.
Brandon. Okay, great. I'll look out for him. I mean, I think that he would know exactly what to do. No. Okay. Gosh, I mean, that's what to do with 2 months left. I wish I had some better advice. I think that I would say this: if he has any inkling to stay, or if he's frustrated with sort of what am I going to do next, but he really wants to give it a shot, I would encourage him to do that if it's something that he really wants to do, just based on what I was saying earlier, that it just takes time. You just have to be around, and you have to be available, and you have to just make yourself seen around the music scene there. And so, I really remember feeling that way, going, gosh, this is. I'm waiting for this to happen and this to happen, and it's taking just forever. And things in my own experience have always taken longer than I would have liked them to.
Can I add also that you did mention earlier that it is perfectly viable to not be in New York City and have a wonderful
Absolutely, experience. Yeah. I think that if he has a great community of musicians that he wants to be playing with here, and he's like, look, I want to come home. I can move back in and just do my thing. I mean, that's just as, that could be even more beneficial. I think that yeah, you can really do it from anywhere. It just depends on your own work ethic and dedication.
I think one of his concerns with these conversations is he's afraid if he leaves New York, he won't be able to get back there again. No. Do you think there's viability in that? He also has ideas. I don't know if that's accurate. Would you say that's accurate or not?
No, not at all. I think that he could come back, spend some time here, just do whatever he's doing, and if he wants to go back, there's a lot of, he can apply for, like I said, there's an O1 visa that's 3 years, and you can sort of extend indefinitely. Yeah, absolutely not. He can definitely come back. He's welcome anytime.
Do we have one more question, and then, sorry, lunch is served, so you had your hand up first, yeah?
Awesome Q&A. It was kind of goes back to one of the things you mentioned where you don't have to go to New York to have a career, and I think when you were talking about your career path, it was interesting, all these opportunities came from you not getting accepted to U of T. So, like, have you ever thought about, what would have happened if I got that U of T acceptance and did my education?
I have. I mean, I think it would have been, I like to think that it would have been
What if Matt hadn't got accepted to U of T, how would his life be different? Is that the question? Yeah.
Gosh, maybe it would be better.
Yeah.
That's like, like I said, there's so many ways to skin a cat, and I think that if you're just, holding yourself to the highest standard that you can and working hard and doing your thing, you're in good shape, Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Matt Stevens.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to hang out if anybody has any questions that they just want to chat or whatever, I'll be around and I'll be happy to chat with anybody. So thanks you guys so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Just so you know, lunch is served out in the boardroom, which is when you came in the front door. If you made a left through the huge metal door, you'd see food. So food is in there. Hopefully, now a bunch of people gave me special requests for certain kinds of meals. And what I'm hoping is that you'll see your names attached to the specific meals, I think. I'm going to go, now that I've promised that, I'm going to go see if that is in fact the case. But so we'll be back here for our next presentation. When? Does someone have a? 3. Okay, great. Thanks.